My name is Serenity Walsh, and I want you to picture this. You're 30 years old, sitting in your childhood home after what should have been the happiest birthday of your life. And the three people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are staring at you like you're a problem they need to solve. The morning after my 30th birthday party, my dad slammed a thick folder on his polished oak desk, the same desk where he used to help me with homework before. Everything changed and told me flatly to sign or get out. My stepmother, Vivian, who moved into my mother's house when I was 12 and slowly erased every trace of her, smirked like she had already won a game I didn't even know we were playing. My half-sister Angela, the golden child who got everything I was denied, let out a little laugh that carried 20 years of sibling rivalry and the bitter taste of always coming second. They thought they had me cornered, this girl who never quite fit into their perfect family portrait, but sitting there in my father's study with the Colorado mountain light pouring through the windows like a spotlight on my humiliation. All I could think was how tragically ironic it all was. The trust fund they were demanding I sign away, trading my independence for their scraps of conditional love, was worth less than what I quietly earned in my sleep each night, from investments they didn't even know existed. The business empire they claimed I needed protection from, like I was some fragile flower who couldn't handle real responsibility, was built on a foundation of fraud and corruption that I was about to expose with evidence that would destroy everything they'd worked to build. They had absolutely no clue that the numbers in my portfolio could buy their precious Boulder mansion twice over, and I wasn't about to bow to people who had spent years systematically stealing not just my inheritance, but my place in what was supposed to be my own family. Before I tell you how I methodically destroyed their lives with 4 revelations that shattered their world like glass, I want to know what time and what city you're listening from. Because this story about finding the courage to stand up to toxic family patterns that have been crushing your soul might just save someone from wasting years trying to earn love that was never meant to be freely given. My dad said firmly, his voice carrying all the authority of a man who had never once asked what I wanted rather than what he thought I should want. Sign here or get out. I looked at him, this stranger wearing my father's face, and I just smiled, because he had no idea that while he was busy replacing me with a newer, more compliant daughter, I had been quietly building an empire that would make his corruption look like pocket change in the real fight, the one that would determine whether I spent the rest of my life as their victim or finally became the woman my grandmother always believed I could be, was just beginning. The air still carried the faint scent of last night's celebration, a mix of spilled champagne and floral arrangements starting to wilt. The estate had been packed with Colorado's elite, developers who had known my father for decades, city councilmen hoping for favors, business partners who shook my hand politely but kept their eyes on Vivian and Angela, waiting to see if I was being tolerated or merely endured. The laughter had been loud, the music expensive, but underneath it all I felt the cold current that always ran beneath these walls. Dad pushed the folder toward me, his gold watch catching the light. Trust agreement, he said, as if the words themselves were sacred. Walsh Properties needed clear succession planning. Family legacy was at stake. He spoke about discipline, about protecting assets from reckless decisions, about guiding me toward responsible adulthood, as if I were not already 30 years old and had not spent the last decade building my own life outside these suffocating walls. I flipped through the document, scanning dense legal language marked with sticky notes and underlined sections. At its heart, it was brutally simple. I would sign away any voting rights tied to the family business. I would receive an allowance, monthly distributions at his discretion, but only if I maintained a lifestyle approved by the board he and Vivienne controlled. No risky ventures, no unvetted relationships, no financial independence. It was a gilded cage, lined with rules written by people who had never trusted me with anything that mattered. I looked up, trying to keep my voice steady. You want me to give up control of my inheritance for an allowance? It's not giving up control, he said, leaning forward with that expression I'd seen him use in boardrooms. It's protection. You've always been impulsive, Serenity. This way you'll have security, and the family assets stay intact for future generations. Angela laughed again, that low, mocking sound I'd been hearing since childhood. Dad's right. You could use some structure in your life. Vivienne's smile never wavered, polished to perfection after years of practice. We only want what's best for you, darling. Imagine the freedom of not having to worry about complicated financial decisions. My chest burned with a familiar ache. I had spent years proving myself, working harder than anyone in this house ever believed possible. And still they saw me as fragile and incompetent. The girl who needed guidance. The daughter who couldn't be trusted. I pushed the folder back toward him across the gleaming wood surface. I'm not signing this today. His expression hardened, the mask of paternal concern slipping away. You have until Friday. Sign it or you're completely cut off. No trust, no property, no contact through the business. You'll be entirely on your own. Something cracked inside my chest, but I kept my face calm. Being cut off didn't frighten me the way he expected it to. What hurt was hearing my father reduce our relationship to a transaction, as if love in this family had always been conditional on compliance. I caught Vivian's satisfied glance, Angela's triumphant smirk, and understood in that crystalline moment that they expected me to crumble, to beg, to accept their terms because they believed I had no other choice. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the Persian rug. "Fine," I said quietly. "Then we'll see what happens." I walked out of the study, my footsteps echoing through the hallway lined with family portraits that had stopped including me after age 12. Every smile in those expensive frames felt like a lie now, a carefully constructed fiction of family unity that had never truly existed. As I stepped onto the stone terrace, the cold mountain air hit my face sharp and bracing against my skin. My hands trembled, but not with fear. With fury so pure it steadied me. This had never been about money, not really. It was about respect, about dignity, about the years I had been pushed to the margins, the moment Vivian moved in and Angela became the shining star. My father had chosen control over love, legacy over trust. He thought I was powerless, that I needed his wealth to survive in the world he had built around us. But I had secrets they couldn't imagine, foundations they knew nothing about. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, something that felt almost like a smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. I stayed outside on the terrace, listening to the wind sweep down from the flat irons, until the sound of familiar laughter drifted from the dining room windows. My family was already moving on as if I had never existed, their lives resuming their comfortable rhythm without missing a beat. The party lights were being taken down, empty glasses cleared away by efficient staff, but the stage for something much larger had already been set. By Friday, everything would be different. They just didn't know it yet. The foundation of my independence was built on loss, though I didn't understand that at 8 years old when my mother died. What I understood was that Grandma Autumn became my anchor in a world that suddenly felt unstable. She was a librarian at the Boulder Public Library, a woman who wore cardigans and sensible shoes, who made me peanut butter sandwiches cut into perfect triangles and taught me to balance a checkbook before I learned algebra. What I didn't know then was that behind her modest exterior, Grandma Autumn was quietly building wealth through careful stock, picks and bond investments. She never talked about money the way my father did, with grand gestures and expensive displays. Instead, she taught me that true wealth comes from what others don't see. When I turned 12, everything changed. Dad married Vivian, a stunning interior designer who swept into our house with fabric, samples, and renovation plans. Within months, our home transformed from the warm, lived-in space my mother had created into something that belonged in Architectural Digest, and somewhere in that transformation I began to disappear. It started subtly. Family photos that had always included me suddenly didn't. Holiday cards featured just Dad Vivian, and eventually baby Angela born when I was 13. When relatives visited, conversations flowed around me as if I were furniture. Vivienne never said anything cruel outright, but her smiles grew thinner when I entered rooms, and her compliments always came with gentle corrections. "Your hair looks nice, sweetie, but maybe we should find you a better stylist. That dress is pretty, but perhaps something more age-appropriate next time." Angela absorbed these lessons without question. By the time she could walk, she knew she was the center of our universe. She was the child who got bedtime stories while I was told I was too old for such things. She was the one whose school plays Dad never missed, while my debate tournaments conflicted with his business dinners. The golden daughter, perfect and precious. While I became the awkward afterthought, college became my escape route. I applied to the University of Colorado Boulder with scholarships I'd earned through grades and determination, not family connections. My dorm room was small but mine, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I threw myself into finance classes, fascinated by the way numbers could represent freedom, security, power over your own destiny. My classmates came from everywhere. Small farming towns, urban projects, suburban middle-class families. What struck me wasn't their differences, but how many of them struggled with basic financial concepts that Grandma Autumn had taught me at the kitchen table. They took on credit card debt without understanding interest rates. They avoided investing because it seemed too complicated, too risky, too far beyond their reach. That's when the idea started forming. Late nights in my tiny dorm room, I began sketching out what would eventually become Equal Wealth. Not just another investment app, but something that could translate complex financial concepts into language real people could understand. Something that could give working families the same tools that had always been available to people like my father. I was in my senior year when Grandma Autumn got sick, cancer moving fast and merciless. I spent every weekend I could at her bedside, and it was during one of those visits that she pressed a small, wooden box into my hands. Letters, she whispered, her voice thin but urgent. For when you need to remember who you really are. She died 3 weeks before my graduation. The funeral was small, attended mostly by her library colleagues and a few neighbors who remembered her kindness. My father gave a brief eulogy about family values, but I could see him checking his watch. Vivian and Angela stayed for exactly the appropriate amount of time before citing other obligations. The reading was different. Grandma Autumn had left me everything. Not just her modest house and savings, but a carefully constructed investment portfolio worth $2.8 million. My father's face went through several expressions before settling on confused irritation, as if he couldn't quite process how his mother-in-law had accumulated such wealth without his knowledge. That night alone in my apartment, I finally opened the wooden box. Inside were dozens of letters in her careful handwriting, each one dated and sealed. Some were from years ago, others more recent. I opened the most recent one first, dated just 6 months before her death. My darling Serenity, it began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're facing choices about your future. I need you to understand something your father doesn't know. The family money isn't as secure as it appears. Theo has been making poor business decisions since he remarried, leveraging properties that should be kept safe, chasing deals that promise quick returns but carry dangerous risks. Vivian encourages this because she doesn't understand the difference between looking wealthy and being wealthy. My hands shook as I read on. Build your own empire, darling. Never depend on Walsh money. Your mother would have wanted you to be free, and I've done what I can to give you that freedom. Use this gift wisely, but more importantly, use it to help others find their own paths to independence. That's where real wealth lies, in the ability to lift others up. I sat there until dawn reading letter after letter, each one filled with investment advice, life lessons, and warnings about trusting others with my financial future. By the time the sun rose over the campus, I understood that my grandmother had been preparing me for this moment my entire life. The letters explained so much. Why she'd always insisted on separate accounts, why she'd taught me about compound interest and diversification, while other kids were learning to ride bikes. Why she'd never seemed impressed by my father's grand gestures or Vivian's expensive tastes. And suddenly this morning's ultimatum made perfect sense. Dad wasn't trying to protect family assets. He was trying to get access to mine. Building equal wealth from my grandmother's inheritance felt like honoring her memory while proving something to myself. I started in 2019 with $2.8 million and a vision that seemed impossible to everyone except me. The first version of the app was clunky, built in my tiny Denver apartment with the help of freelance developers I found on coding forums, but it worked, and more importantly, it solved a real problem. My target users weren't the wealthy investors who already had access to premium financial services. They were people like Maria, a single mother from Pueblo who wanted to save for her daughter's college but didn't know where to start. Like James, a construction worker from Colorado Springs who had been burned by a predatory investment advisor and was afraid to try again. These were the people my grandmother would have helped at the library, patiently explaining compound interest the same way she'd helped them find the right books. The breakthrough came when I partnered with community banks and credit unions across Colorado. Instead of competing with traditional financial institutions, Equal Wealth became their entry point for customers who had been intimidated by investment minimums and complex fee structures. We offered education-first, investments second. Every user started with financial literacy modules that broke down concepts like diversification and risk tolerance into plain English. Growth was slow at first. 500 beta users became 2,000, then 10,000. Local newspapers started writing about the Denver tech startup, democratizing investing. TechCrunch featured us in a roundup of innovative fintech companies. Forbes included me in their 30 under 30 list, though I made sure the photo shoot happened at our modest downtown office, not at the family estate. By 2024, we had over 50,000 active users and partnerships with regional banks across the Mountain West. Revenue was growing at 40% year over year. Major financial services companies had started reaching out about acquisition possibilities, though I wasn't ready to sell. The mission mattered more than the money, even as my personal portfolio grew alongside the company's success. I lived intentionally modestly, not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand my users' experiences firsthand. My one-bedroom apartment in the Highlands neighborhood cost a fraction of what I could afford. I drove a reliable Honda Civic instead of the luxury cars my father's friends expected from successful entrepreneurs. When I shopped at King Soopers or grabbed coffee at local cafes, I was living the same financial reality as the people using our app. That's where I met Phoenix Rivera in early 2024 at a Denver tech meetup focused on social impact startups. He was presenting his company's work on affordable solar installations for low-income housing, his passion evident as he talked about energy justice and environmental equity. After his presentation, I introduced myself, drawn to his genuine commitment to making technology serve people who needed it most. Phoenix was a software engineer whose parents had immigrated from Guadalajara when he was 5. His father worked construction. His mother cleaned houses, and they had sacrificed everything to give their children opportunities they'd never had. He understood what it meant to build something from nothing, to carry the weight of family expectations while forging your own path. We started dating slowly, carefully. Coffee conversations turned into hiking trips in the Rockies, shared meals at food trucks downtown, late nights talking about how technology could address systemic inequality. He knew Equal Wealth was successful, had even downloaded the app and praised its user interface. But I never mentioned the acquisition offers or the size of my investment portfolio. It wasn't deception exactly, just a comfortable omission that let our relationship develop. Without the complexity of wealth disparity, my family knew even less about my success. During the occasional family dinners I attended, Dad would ask patronizing questions about my little app, as if I were playing house with technology. When are you going to be ready for real business? Serenity. When will you outgrow this phase and join something substantial like Walsh Properties? Vivian would smile her practiced smile and suggest I might consider a nice marketing role at an established company, somewhere I could use my creativity without the stress of entrepreneurship. Angela, now 25 and working in social media marketing, would roll her eyes at what she saw as my stubborn independence. Why make things so hard for yourself when Dad's already built something successful? Only 2 people knew the real scope of what I'd built. Sage, my older sister from Dad's first marriage, understood because she'd always been the family rebel herself. She'd moved to Fort Collins after college, became a high school teacher, married young and divorced young when her ex-husband turned out to be controlling and financially irresponsible. We talked every few weeks, and she celebrated every milestone Equal Wealth reached without asking about profit margins or exit strategies. Indigo Park had been my roommate sophomore year at CU Boulder, the daughter of Korean immigrants who'd become a powerhouse corporate lawyer at a prestigious Denver firm. She'd helped me navigate the legal complexities of starting Equal Wealth, had introduced me to the right accountants and business advisors, and was one of the few people who knew exactly how much my company and investments were worth. Last month, when Sage mentioned struggling with divorce attorney fees, I'd quietly arranged for her legal aid society to receive an anonymous grant that covered her costs. She never knew it came from me, but seeing her relief when she called to say a mysterious benefactor had stepped in made every late night of building Equal Wealth worthwhile. That was the thing my family never understood. Wealth wasn't about accumulation for its own sake. It was about the freedom to help people without fanfare, to solve problems without asking permission, to build something that mattered beyond quarterly profit reports. The phone started ringing before I'd even gotten back to my apartment. The first call was from Dad's golf buddy, Robert Manning, expressing concern about family disagreements and hoping everyone could work things out reasonably. The second was from Vivian's book club friend, Janet Morrison, who'd heard there might be some family tension and wanted to offer support. The third was from a business associate who suggested that sometimes young people need guidance in financial matters. I turned off my phone after the 4th call. Dad was working the Boulder social network, framing the story before I had a chance to tell my own version. Ungrateful daughter, family trying to help, poor judgment that needed correction. Within hours, the narrative would be set in stone among the people who mattered in his world. But I had my own network now, built on trust instead of transactions. My first call went to Sage in Fort Collins. She answered on the second ring, her voice slightly breathless from managing her 6th grade classroom. "Serenity, what's wrong? You sound upset." I gave her the condensed version, the ultimatum, the trust fund document, the threat of being cut off completely. She listened without interrupting, then let out a long breath. "That bastard," she said quietly, then immediately apologized. "Sorry, I'm at school." But honestly, Serenity, this doesn't surprise me. Do you remember during my divorce proceedings, when we were going through financial discovery, my lawyer kept asking about business connections, and David's attorney mentioned something about questionable permit approvals involving Walsh Properties. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now it makes sense, I finished. Something's not right with the family finances. Sage agreed to drive down that evening. "Whatever you need," she said. "We stick together in this family, the real family." My second call went to Indigo Park. She was in the middle of a deposition but took my call anyway, stepping out of the conference room when I told her it was urgent. "Let me guess," she said after I'd explained the situation. "Trust fund with restrictive conditions, sign immediately or else, and they're applying social pressure through family friends." Exactly. Can you look at the document, of course? But Serenity, the timing on this is suspicious. Most estate planning happens gradually, with family meetings and discussions. Ultimatums usually mean desperation. That's what I was afraid of. I was settling in for a quiet evening of research when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Vivian standing in the hallway, perfectly dressed despite the late hour, holding a small gift bag. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. "Serenity, darling, I brought you some tea, chamomile for stress. I thought we might talk." Her smile was warm practiced, the same one she'd perfected for charity galas and business dinners. But her eyes were calculating, measuring my reaction to her unexpected visit. "I'm not really in the mood for visitors tonight, Vivian." She stepped forward anyway, forcing me to either block her physically or let her enter. I stepped aside but left the door open. "Your father is just trying to protect you, sweetheart. He sees how hard you're working on that little app, how much stress you're under. The trust fund would give you security, freedom from worry." The condescension in calling equal wealth a little app rankled, but I kept my expression neutral. Freedom from worry or freedom from choice? Her smile flickered. Choice can be overwhelming when you're not used to having real money to manage. Look what happened to so many lottery winners or young athletes who got big contracts. They lost everything because they didn't have proper guidance. I crossed my arms. "And you think I need that kind of guidance?" "I think you need family support. We all do. Theo has built something remarkable with Walsh Properties, something that could benefit all of us for generations. But only if we work together." When I didn't respond, her mask began to slip. The smile became strained, her voice slightly sharper. "You have no idea what's at stake here, Serenity. What your father has risked to build this legacy. Sometimes protecting that legacy requires difficult decisions." There it was. The admission that this wasn't about protecting me at all. "What kind of risks, Vivian?" She caught herself, the practiced smile snapping back into place. "Nothing you need to worry about if you sign the documents." The sound of footsteps in the hallway made us both turn. Phoenix appeared in the doorway, carrying takeout bags from our favorite Thai restaurant, his expression confused as he took in the scene. "Oh, I didn't know you had company. Should I come back later?" Vivian's eyes sharpened with interest as she looked Phoenix up and down, cataloging his appearance, his casual clothes, the restaurant bags that suggested a comfortable but not wealthy lifestyle. "You must be Phoenix," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Vivian, Serenity's stepmother. I've heard so much about you." Phoenix shook her hand politely but glanced at me with concern. "Is everything okay?" Vivian was already gathering her purse, her mission apparently complete now that she'd gotten a look at my boyfriend. "Of course, darling, I was just leaving." "Phoenix, I hope we'll have a chance to chat more soon. I'd love to hear about your work." After she left, Phoenix set down the food and turned to me with questions in his eyes. "What was that about?" She seemed intense. I sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. "Family stuff. It's complicated. The kind of complicated situation where your stepmother shows up, unannounced at 9 p.m. to bring you tea." I looked at Phoenix, this man I'd been dating for 8 months, who knew about my work and my dreams but not about the wealth I'd built or the family dynamics that had shaped me. He deserved honesty, but honesty meant revealing things that could change everything. "Between us, my family wants me to sign some financial documents," I said carefully. "I don't want to sign them." Now there's pressure from all sides. Phoenix sat beside me, his expression serious. "What kind of documents? The kind that would give them control over my financial decisions?" His jaw tightened. "That's not okay. You're 30 years old. You run a successful company. Why would they think they have the right to control your finances?" It was a fair question, and answering it meant admitting truths I hadn't been ready to share. But looking at his concerned face, I realized that keeping secrets was just another form of the control I'd been fighting against my entire life. "Because they don't know how successful the company really is," I said quietly. "They think I need their help. But Phoenix, there are things about my financial situation that I haven't told you." Before he could respond, my phone rang. It was Sage. "I'm 20 minutes out," she said. "And Serenity, I've been thinking about what I remembered from the divorce proceedings. I think we need to dig deeper into Walsh Properties. Something's not right there." I looked at Phoenix, who was listening to my side of the conversation with growing concern, and realized that my careful life of measured revelations was about to come to an end. The storm was gathering, and there would be no more hiding from it. Indigo arrived at my apartment the next morning with coffee and a grim expression. She spread the trust fund documents across my dining table while Sage sat beside me, both of us watching her work through the legal language with practiced efficiency. "This is worse than I thought," Indigo said, tapping her pen against a particularly dense section. "These aren't standard protective measures. This is designed to strip you of any financial autonomy while giving your father and Vivian complete discretionary control. She pulled out her laptop and started typing. I need to make a call. I worked on a case last year involving boulder development, corruption, city planning irregularities, suspicious permit approvals, that kind of thing. My investigator contact might still be working that angle. 20 minutes later, we were driving downtown to meet Sterling Knox at a small cafe tucked between office buildings. He was exactly what you'd expect from a former FBI financial crimes specialist. Mid-40s with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything in the room before settling on us. I've been building a case against Walsh Properties for 8 months, he said without preamble, sliding a thin file across the table. Started as part of a broader investigation into city planning, corruption, but your father's company kept appearing in unusual patterns. The file contained permit applications, bid documents, and LLC registration forms. To my untrained eye, they looked like standard business paperwork. But Sterling walked us through the red flags. Multiple shell companies bidding on the same projects, environmental impact assessments that bypassed normal review processes, construction costs that seemed inflated compared to similar developments. Your father has been very careful, Sterling continued, but not careful enough. The problem with complex financial structures is they leave paper trails. I've been following those trails slowly, methodically. But if you're willing to provide inside information about family finances, we could accelerate this timeline significantly. What exactly are you looking for? I asked. Evidence of bid rigging, tax evasion through the LLC structures, possible kickbacks to city officials. The kind of thing that would explain why someone might need liquid assets quickly. While we were meeting with Sterling, Angela was launching her own campaign. Phoenix showed me her Instagram story that evening, a carefully crafted post about family loyalty and people who bite the hand that feeds them. She'd tagged several mutual friends from our Boulder social circle, ensuring maximum visibility for her message. Phoenix scrolled through the comments, his expression troubled. She's really going after you publicly. I felt a familiar knot of anger in my stomach. That's Angela. She's never been subtle about anything. But then Phoenix showed me his phone again, and I saw that Angela had direct messaged him. Not just once, but several times over the past 2 days. Messages expressing concern about my stress levels, my decision-making, the pressure I was apparently putting on the family. Why didn't you tell me she was contacting you directly? I asked. Phoenix set down his phone and turned to face me fully. Because I was hoping you'd tell me what's really going on. Serenity, I told you about my family's struggles when we immigrated, how my parents worked multiple jobs, how we lived in a studio apartment for 3 years while they saved every penny. I shared my financial stress with you, but you've never once mentioned your family has money or that there's some kind of inheritance involved. His voice wasn't angry exactly, but there was hurt underneath the confusion. I felt the ground shifting beneath our relationship, the careful balance I'd maintained between honesty and privacy, suddenly unstable. It's complicated, I said, which sounded weak even to me. How complicated are you wealthy? Is your family wealthy? Because if they are, and you've been letting me pay for dates while you're sitting on some trust fund? No, I interrupted. It's not like that. Phoenix, my family thinks I'm broke. They think I'm struggling with a failing startup and need their financial support. His eyebrows shot up. But you're not. No, I'm not. Before I could explain further, Sage called with more troubling news. Her divorce attorney had mentioned something else during their case review. Theo had been unusually aggressive about accelerating his asset, restructuring timeline, pushing for completion before the end of the year. My lawyer thought it was strange, Sage said. Most estate planning happens gradually. But your father seemed desperate to get everything finalized by December. That's only 7 months away. I thanked Sage and hung up, but the pieces were forming an ugly picture. The ultimatum, the accelerated timeline, the unusual pressure to sign immediately. This wasn't about protecting family assets. This was about accessing them. Sterling called that evening with preliminary findings that confirmed my worst suspicions. Walsh Properties had been liquidating assets faster than normal business cycles would warrant. 3 major development projects were significantly over budget, with bank loans secured against family properties. Your father isn't just seeking control, Sterling said. He's facing a cash flow crisis. The question is how desperate he's become and what he's willing to do to solve it. Sterling's deeper investigation painted a picture of systematic corruption that went far beyond what I'd imagined. Walsh Properties hadn't just bent a few rules. They'd built their success on a foundation of fraudulent practices. The evidence was methodical and damning. No-bid city contracts awarded through relationships with Boulder city council members who later received consulting fees from Walsh subsidiary companies. Environmental shortcuts on riverside developments that should have triggered federal oversight. Construction bids coordinated with other contractors to ensure Walsh properties always came in just under their competitors. But it was the financial structure that revealed the real scope of the problem. Theo had created a maze of LLC entities, each one designed to obscure the flow of money between projects. Sterling traced funds moving from successful developments to prop up failing ones, from family trust accounts to cover business shortfalls, from legitimate contracts to offshore accounts that had no clear business purpose. Meanwhile, Angela escalated her campaign beyond social media. She orchestrated an elaborate coincidence at Phoenix's favorite coffee shop, showing up with her friend Maya just as he was grabbing his usual morning coffee before work. I only learned about it when Phoenix came home that evening, confused and defensive in a way I'd never seen before. "Your sister was at Novo today," he said without preamble, "with a friend who apparently knows about tech startups. They seemed really concerned about you. Angela happened to be at your coffee shop. That's what I thought at first." But then Maya started talking about startup failure rates, how many companies burn through investor money without sustainable business models. She mentioned some articles she'd read about fintech companies. Specifically, Angela seemed genuinely worried that you might be in financial trouble. I stared at him, processing the calculated nature of Angela's manipulation. She'd researched his routine, chosen the right friend to bring credibility to her concerns, and crafted a message designed to exploit his family's financial fears. "What exactly did they say?" Phoenix ran his hands through his hair, clearly struggling with conflicting information. "Angela said the family's been trying to help you for months, but you're too proud to accept support." Maya had statistics about how many promising startups fail in their first 5 years, especially when founders don't have business experience or proper financial backing, and you believed them. "I don't know what to believe. That's the problem. You won't tell me what's really going on, so I'm getting information from your sister, who at least seems willing to have honest conversations about family concerns." The accusation hit harder than I expected. Phoenix was right. I had been keeping secrets, maintaining careful boundaries around information that affected both of us. But I'd learned those habits from years of protecting myself from family manipulation. "You want an honest conversation?" I asked. "Fine. Angela's lying. She's not concerned about my well-being. She's trying to break us up because she's afraid of losing her position as the family princess." Phoenix's expression remained skeptical. "Why would she care about our relationship? Because if I'm happy and independent, it threatens the story they've told themselves about me being fragile and needy." But before I could explain further, my phone rang. It was Vivian, and her voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Serenity, darling, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Some people have been asking questions about Walsh Properties, and your father is quite upset. Perhaps we could all sit down together and work through this family disagreement before it gets out of hand." "What kind of questions?" I asked. "Business questions, about permits and contracts and things I don't really understand." "But your father says it's all routine inquiries. Nothing to worry about. He just thinks it would be better if we presented a united family front while these bureaucrats do their review." It was a mistake on Vivian's part, revealing that outside pressure was being applied to Walsh Properties. She was trying to sound casual, but I could hear the strain underneath her words. "And you think my signing the trust fund documents would help with that? I think family unity is always important during stressful times. Your father has worked so hard to build something substantial for all of us. It would be a shame if misunderstandings or outside interference damaged that legacy." After I hung up, I found Phoenix staring at me with new understanding in his eyes. "That didn't sound like a normal family conversation," he said quietly. "No, it didn't." Sterling called an hour later with the information that changed everything. He'd uncovered draft legal documents showing Theo's real plan. Asset transfers to an offshore trust structure with Vivian as the sole beneficiary scheduled for completion in December. Both Sage and I would be completely cut out of any family inheritance. "Your ultimatum isn't about protecting you," Sterling said. "It's about timing. He needs your signature now to legitimize these transfers before anyone discovers what he's really doing. The trust fund document you're supposed to sign contains language that would retroactively approve asset movements that have already begun. So if I sign, I'm not just giving up control of my future inheritance. I'm approving the theft of my existing inheritance." "That's exactly right. And given the timeline pressure, I'd guess he's got creditors or regulatory deadlines that are forcing his hand." I looked at Phoenix, who was listening to my side of the conversation with a growing alarm. The family that's so concerned about my financial judgment, I said after hanging up, is in the process of stealing my inheritance to cover their own financial crimes. Phoenix was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached for my hand. I owe you an apology. I was so focused on feeling left out that I didn't see what was really happening. Your family isn't trying to help you. They're trying to use you. I squeezed his hand, grateful for his understanding, but knowing that the real confrontation was still ahead of us. That was just the beginning. The decision to tell Phoenix everything came after 3 sleepless nights and the realization that building a relationship on partial truths was just another form of the control I'd been fighting against my entire life. We met at my apartment Thursday evening, 2 days before Dad's ultimatum deadline, and I laid out the complete financial picture. His reaction wasn't what I'd hoped for. I fell in love with who I thought was a struggling entrepreneur, not a secret millionaire, he said quietly, staring at the portfolio statements spread across my coffee table. I need to understand what else I don't know about us. The hurt in his voice cut deeper than anger would have. Phoenix wasn't upset about the money itself, but about the months of careful omissions that had shaped our entire relationship. I watched him process not just the numbers, but their implications for every dinner he'd paid for, every modest date we'd planned, every conversation about financial stress that I'd listened to, without revealing my own situation. I need some time to think about this, he said finally. Not about the money, but about what it means that you didn't trust me enough to tell me. Before he left, I asked him to be part of my team for Friday's confrontation. Despite his uncertainty about our relationship, he agreed to provide backup support. That meant something, even if I wasn't sure what. Thursday morning, I made one last attempt at peaceful resolution. I called Dad and asked to meet privately, suggesting we could find a compromise that protected both family interests and my independence. He agreed to see me at his downtown office, away from Vivian and Angela's influence. The Walsh Properties building occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in central Boulder, all polished marble and expensive art that screamed success to anyone who walked through the lobby. Dad's corner office overlooked the Flatirons, the mountain views that had always symbolized Colorado achievement to his generation. He was cordial but distant, gesturing to the leather chairs across from his massive desk. I'd prepared a reasonable proposal modified trust terms that gave me more autonomy while still protecting family assets. Gradual transition of responsibilities instead of immediate control, and involvement in major decisions rather than complete exclusion. Dad listened without interrupting, then shook his head before I'd even finished. You don't understand the business pressures we're facing, Serenity. The market conditions, the regulatory environment, the competition. This isn't about family dynamics. This is about survival. The trust structure isn't negotiable. His voice carried a desperation I'd never heard before, confirming Sterling's assessment about cash flow problems. Dad wasn't protecting family wealth. He was trying to access it. What kind of survival are we talking about? I asked. The kind that determines whether Walsh Properties exists in 5 years or becomes another casualty of economic instability. That afternoon, I assembled my full team in Indigo's conference room. The evidence Sterling had gathered painted a picture of systematic financial misconduct that went far beyond what any of us had imagined. Sterling spread documents across the polished table bank, statements showing unusual fund transfers, email chains between Theo and city officials, construction contracts with inflated costs, and LLC formations designed to obscure money trails. He's been using family trust funds to cover business losses for over 2 years, Sterling explained. Money that was designated for both you and Sage has been diverted to prop up failing development projects. 3 major builds are significantly over budget, with bank loans secured against family properties as collateral. Indigo reviewed the legal implications while River Santos, my CTO, prepared comprehensive documentation of equal wealth success. The contrast was stark. While Dad's company was hemorrhaging money through fraud and mismanagement, my legitimate business had grown to a $4.2 million valuation with acquisition interest from major financial firms. Goldman Sachs' subsidiary has made preliminary inquiries about a buyout, River reported. Potential value could exceed $12 million. We've also got interest from 2 other major players in the fintech space. The numbers were staggering when laid out systematically. My inheritance from Grandma Autumn, properly invested, had grown to $4.3 million. Equal wealth equity represented another $3.6 million. My diversified investment portfolio added $4.9 million more. Total net worth $11.3 million. All of it earned or invested independently of Walsh Properties. Meanwhile, Sage provided the final piece of evidence we needed. Her divorce proceedings had revealed that her ex-husband held consulting contracts with Walsh Properties, contracts that Sterling's investigation showed were part of the bid rigging scheme. Even her personal life had been touched by Dad's corruption. Indigo outlined our legal options: fiduciary duty violations, criminal tax fraud referrals, potential RICO charges for the systematic bid rigging with city officials. We weren't just defending against Dad's ultimatum. We could dismantle his entire fraudulent operation. As we prepared for Friday's confrontation, I felt the weight of accumulated evidence, the support of people who believed in truth over family loyalty, and the strength that comes from knowing you're fighting for something larger than personal grievance. The girl who had been dismissed and controlled was about to reveal exactly who she'd become. Friday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of Colorado day that makes the mountains look close enough to touch. I drove up to the family estate with Indigo beside me, both of us dressed professionally, carrying portfolios that contained enough evidence to destroy the carefully constructed fiction of Walsh family respectability. Phoenix and Sterling waited in the car at the bottom of the long driveway, backup support if the confrontation escalated beyond what we could handle alone. Knowing they were there gave me confidence, but this fight belonged to me. The dining room had been prepared like a boardroom, with Dad at the head of the mahogany table in an expensive charcoal suit that couldn't quite hide the stress lines around his eyes. Vivienne sat to his right, perfectly styled but with nervous energy that manifested in the way her fingers drummed against her coffee cup. Angela lounged against the window, excited anticipation written across her face as she prepared to watch what she assumed would be my capitulation. Dad started with a prepared speech about family legacy and the difficult decisions that leadership required. Vivienne added comments about helping me mature financially, her voice honey-sweet with condescension. Angela contributed remarks about finally learning family responsibility, her smirk suggesting this was entertainment as much as business. I let them finish, then placed my portfolio on the table without opening it. Before we discussed family money, I said calmly, "You need to understand my financial position." I opened the portfolio and spread out financial statements with methodical precision. Bank statements, investment summaries, business valuations, all organized and tabbed for easy review. The numbers told a story they weren't expecting. $8 million inheritance properly invested and grown. $6 million in equal wealth equity. $9 million in diversified investments. Total net worth $11.3 million. The silence stretched for several seconds before Dad started laughing, the sound sharp with disbelief. "These numbers are impossible for someone your age," he said, reaching for the documents. "You can't accumulate this kind of wealth from a startup app." Vivienne's smile became strained as she scanned the bank statements. "Fantasy figures to avoid responsibility," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Angela pushed away from the window, her excitement replaced by confusion. "These are just desperate lies to get attention," she said. But she was staring at the papers with a growing alarm. I reached into my portfolio again and produced the verification documents I'd spent 2 days preparing. Certified financial audit from Morrison & Associates, one of Denver's most respected CPA firms. Business valuation from an independent assessor. Screenshots of acquisition inquiry emails from Goldman Sachs and 2 other major financial services companies. Names redacted, but letterheads clearly visible. "This isn't a hobby app you've been dismissing, Dad. Equal Wealth serves over 50,000 active users, has partnerships with regional banks across the Mountain West, and has been featured in TechCrunch, Forbes, and the Wall Street Journal. We've got acquisition offers that could exceed $12 million. I watched Dad examine the documents with growing disbelief, his confident dismissal crumbling as the evidence proved authentic. Vivienne's composure wavered as she realized the implications of what she was seeing. Angela stood speechless for what might have been the first time in her adult life. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely, but I wasn't finished. Now I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "Let's discuss why you really need my signature on that trust fund document." I reached for Sterling's investigation file, the evidence of corruption and financial misconduct that would destroy not just their ultimatum, but their entire carefully constructed world. For the first time in my life, they were listening to me with something approaching respect. But respect born from fear was about to become something much more devastating. They still had no idea what was coming next. I opened Sterling's investigation file with deliberate care, spreading the evidence across the mahogany table like a prosecutor, presenting a case. The documentation was comprehensive and damning: permit applications with forged signatures, bid coordination emails between Walsh Properties and supposedly competing contractors, environmental impact assessments that had bypassed mandatory federal reviews. "Walsh Properties isn't just struggling financially," I said, watching Dad's face grow pale as he recognized his own signature on questionable documents. It's built on systematic corruption that's finally catching up. Dad tried to bluster his way through the evidence, his voice rising with defensive anger. These are routine business practices, Serenity. Every successful developer works within the system to expedite projects. This is a vindictive attack by an ungrateful daughter who doesn't understand how real business operates. But Sterling's investigation was too thorough for dismissal. Recorded phone conversations with city officials discussing expedited permits in exchange for consulting fees. Email trails showing coordination with other contractors to inflate bid prices. Financial transfers from Walsh Properties accounts to offshore LLCs with no apparent business purpose. Indigo placed additional documents on the table, her lawyer's precision cutting through Dad's attempts at deflection. These aren't routine business practices, Mr. Walsh. These are federal crimes: tax evasion, bid rigging, bribery of public officials. Any one of these charges could result in significant prison time. Vivienne picked up one of the offshore account statements, her manicured hands trembling slightly as she read, "Theo, what is this? You told me these were legitimate business expenses." The second revelation hit even harder. Sterling had conducted forensic accounting on the family trust funds, tracing money that should have been preserved for Sage and my inheritance. Instead, those funds had been systematically diverted to cover Walsh Properties' losses, prop up failing developments, and fund the very corruption schemes that were now unraveling. "You haven't been managing family wealth," I said, my voice steady despite the magnitude of betrayal I was revealing. "You've been stealing it to prop up a failing business built on fraud." The numbers were stark. $2 million from Sage's designated inheritance, $800,000 from mine, plus additional funds from the general family trust that should have been preserved for future generations. All of it gone, absorbed into the black hole of Dad's financial desperation. Vivienne's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Her voice rose to a pitch I'd never heard before as she turned on Dad with fury. "You risked everything. Our security. The girls' futures. Our reputation for what?" Theo Toe, avoid admitting your business failures. Their marriage, unity, built on shared financial interests rather than genuine partnership, fractured under the pressure of exposure. Vivienne began distancing herself, claiming ignorance of the business decisions that now threatened to destroy them both. But I wasn't finished. The third folder contained evidence of Angela's systematic campaign to undermine my relationships, documentation that Sterling had gathered through social media, monitoring and witness interviews. Text message screenshots showed Angela coordinating with friends to spread rumors about my financial instability. Social media posts designed to embarrass me publicly. Most damaging were witness statements from people she'd approached, including Phoenix's co-workers, with carefully crafted stories about my poor judgment and family concerns. "Your jealousy almost cost me my relationship," I said, watching Angela's face crumble as she realized the scope of evidence against her. "You couldn't handle your sister's success, so you tried to destroy it." Angela's breakdown was swift and complete. Years of resentment poured out in a torrent of confession and self-pity. "I worked so hard to be perfect," she sobbed. "Perfect grades, perfect behavior, everything Dad and Vivienne wanted. But you just disappeared for years and came back successful without even trying. It wasn't fair." Vivienne tried to defend her daughter, but even she seemed shaken by the calculated nature of Angela's manipulation campaign. The golden child she'd raised had revealed herself to be petty, vindictive, and willing to destroy family relationships for personal gain. Dad made one final desperate attempt at control, his voice returning to the authoritative tone he'd used to dominate. "Family discussions for decades, fine. You want to tear apart this family with legal technicalities and adolescent resentments. You're cut off completely. Removed from the will, barred from family properties. Persona non grata in Boulder society. You'll find out how far your little app gets you without family connections." The threat might have worked on the insecure girl who'd left for college years ago, but that girl no longer existed. "You can't threaten me with poverty when I'm richer than you are," I said, my voice calm and steady. "You can't threaten social exile when I have my own community, my own success, my own reputation built on legitimate achievements rather than fraud." I leaned forward, meeting his eyes directly for perhaps the first time in my adult life. "The only question now is whether you face these corruption charges as a private family matter or a public criminal case." The silence stretched for long seconds as the full implications settled over them. Dad's authority was gone, his financial empire exposed as built on sand and criminal activity. Vivienne's social position was threatened by association with his crimes. Angela's carefully constructed image as the perfect daughter had been revealed as a facade covering years of manipulation and jealousy. I offered them terms not out of generosity, but from a position of absolute strength: immediate cessation of all asset transfers to offshore accounts, fair distribution of any remaining legitimate family money, public acknowledgement of equal wealth success and my business achievements. Most importantly, a family agreement to treat me with basic respect and dignity going forward. Choose, I said simply. Accept these terms and we handle this privately, with appropriate legal oversight to ensure compliance. Refuse, and I turn Sterling's evidence over to the FBI, the IRS, and the Colorado Attorney General's office. They can explain to federal prosecutors why family trust money was used to fund corruption schemes. Dad stared at the documents spread before him, evidence of crimes that could destroy not just his business but his freedom. Vivian clutched her coffee cup like an anchor, her perfect world crumbling around her manicured fingernails. Angela sat silent, processing the collapse of everything she'd believed about family, dynamics, and her own privileged position. One by one they nodded their acceptance, not out of love or recognition of past wrongs, but out of fear of consequences that could destroy them completely. The girl they'd dismissed as weak and dependent had just dictated terms to the people who'd controlled her entire life, and for the first time since childhood I felt genuinely free. I walked out of the family estate feeling emotionally drained, but genuinely liberated for the first time in decades. The mountain air hit my face as I stepped onto the stone terrace, crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and possibility. Phoenix was waiting by his car at the bottom of the driveway, leaning against the hood with Sterling beside him, both of them watching my approach with concerned expressions. "How did it go?" Phoenix asked as I reached them. "It's over," I said simply. They accepted the terms. The drive back to Denver took us through winding mountain roads that had always symbolized home to me, but today they felt different, like pathways to freedom rather than ties to a past that had never fully accepted me. Phoenix drove while I sat in the passenger seat, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. "We need to talk," he said finally, his voice gentle but serious, not about what happened back there, but about us, about how we move forward. "I know you need time to process everything," I replied. "It's not just about processing your wealth. It's about learning how to build a relationship on complete honesty going forward. I fell in love with someone I thought I knew completely, and finding out I was wrong about something so fundamental makes me question what else I might not understand." His honesty hurt, but it was fair. We agreed to try couples counseling to rebuild our foundation on transparency rather than the careful omissions that had shaped our early relationship. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation, but it was real, and that mattered more than easy answers. The consequences of that Friday morning confrontation rippled through our lives over the following months. Dad quietly restructured Walsh Properties to address the legal violations Sterling had uncovered, working within a federal cooperation agreement that kept him out of prison but under close regulatory scrutiny. The company survived barely, but his reputation in Boulder's business community never fully recovered. Vivian surprised everyone by entering therapy and making genuine attempts to repair our relationship. Our conversations were awkward at first, stilted attempts at connection across years of mutual resentment, but gradually they became something approaching authentic. She would never be a mother figure to me, but she could be a family member who treated me with basic respect. Angela's transformation was the most dramatic. Stripped of her golden child status and forced to confront the consequences of her manipulation, she began working with a business mentor to develop her own marketing consultancy. The process was humbling but ultimately beneficial, teaching her skills she'd never needed while riding on family connections. 6 months after the confrontation, she asked me for mentorship advice about client acquisition and business development. The conversation was tentative professional rather than sisterly, but it was a start. Sage's divorce finalized with an unexpectedly favorable settlement when her ex-husband's lawyer advised against prolonging proceedings that might expose his client's connections to Walsh Properties corruption. She moved closer to Denver, taking a teaching position in Arvada, and we began building the adult-sister relationship we'd never had time to develop. The most satisfying changes were professional. Goldman Sachs subsidiary finalized their acquisition offer at $14.2 million, allowing me to retain 25% equity and a leadership role in expanding equal wealth nationally. The windfall gave me resources to establish an impact investment fund targeting women-led social enterprises, the kind of businesses that traditional venture capital often overlooked. I moved to a penthouse in downtown Denver, not to show off wealth but to be closer to the community I'd chosen over the one I'd been born into. The space was modern and comfortable, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city I'd made my home through determination rather than inheritance. Phoenix and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, attending counseling sessions that taught us both how to communicate across the gaps that secrecy and assumption had created. By winter, he'd moved in with me, and we were planning a future based on shared values rather than hidden complexities. The most meaningful project was establishing the Autumn Walsh Foundation in my grandmother's memory. The foundation provided financial literacy education and microloans for young women starting businesses, with special emphasis on daughters of immigrant families. When Phoenix helped me review the first round of scholarship applications, seeing his pride in supporting women who reminded him of his own sisters made me understand that some wealth was meant to be shared. Family dinners resumed on a quarterly basis, formal affairs where we maintained polite boundaries and avoided topics that had once defined our relationships. Dad and I would never have the close relationship I'd craved as a child, but we could coexist with mutual respect for what we'd each built independently. Vivienne made efforts at conversation that sometimes approached genuine interest. Angela gradually matured into someone I could imagine having adult conversations with, though we'd probably never be close. The family portraits lining the hallway remained unchanged, but they no longer had power over me. On a spring evening, almost a year after that confrontation, I stood on my balcony overlooking the Denver skyline, Phoenix beside me as we watched the sunset behind the mountains. Equal wealth was thriving under Goldman Sachs resources. My investment fund had supported 12 women-owned startups, and the Autumn Walsh Foundation had awarded its first annual scholarships. Success wasn't measured just in financial independence, though that mattered. It was measured in the ability to maintain dignity while setting healthy boundaries, to choose authenticity over acceptance, to break generational patterns of manipulation and control that had shaped my family for decades. Sometimes the greatest act of family loyalty is refusing to enable dysfunction. If your family demands you shrink to fit their limitations, remember you have the power to grow beyond their expectations. Breaking free requires courage, but it creates space for authentic relationships built on respect rather than control. Share in the comments. When did you have to choose between family, approval, and self-respect? Your story might inspire someone else to choose authenticity over acceptance. Sometimes walking away from what's familiar is the first step toward finding what's truly yours.